My name is Donald Combe. I'm the sexton of the cemetery here at St. Mark's Church in Niagara-on-the-Lake. When I retired after 35 years of teaching at Niagara College, a fellow teacher and I became interested in genealogy, and we began transcribing 2 of the cemeteries in Niagara-on-the-Lake. That led on to a deeper interest in the cemetery, because we felt that every stone in all of the cemeteries, in every cemetery, is a story. And so we began compiling a book called Stones, Saints, and Sinners, which deals with the 3 major cemeteries in Niagara-on-the-Lake. I've been the sexton of St. Mark's Cemetery for nearly 20 years, and over those 20 years, a great deal of knowledge of the cemetery rests in my head. And it's time that some of this information is shared for the wider public. Several years ago, a couple of young girls appeared at my door. They'd been sent by the museum to see me because I apparently was the one who knew everything about the stones in St. Mark's Cemetery. Now, these 2 young girls asked me if cats and dogs were buried at St. Mark's. And I said, no, only people were buried at St. Mark's. Well, they insisted that there was a cat buried at St. Mark's, and they wanted to show me. So they brought me over and brought me to this stone. Now, the stone does indeed on it say Kitty. So their assumption was that was a cat. Well, I went into the church records and found that this was a girl named Kitty, but her real name was Catherine. And she died when she was about 10 years old, which was about the age of the 2 girls. Well, the girls were so astonished and amazed that they'd found a kind of friend. So from that time forward, for a long, long time, they'd come to the cemetery and bring flowers and toys and decorations for this grave. And as I pointed out to them, obviously the mother and father of Kitty were very, very much fond of this child, because they spent a lot of money with this elaborate fence and a chain and even a tree which grew up through the fence and is now dead. So these 2 girls for many years, and I think still, come to St. Mark's to visit their friend Kitty. This is the monument to Elizabeth Kerr. Elizabeth Kerr died in 1794, I believe age 32, and probably died at that early age because of childbirth. Elizabeth had very illustrious parents. Her mother was Molly Brant, and her father was Sir William Johnson. She was married to Robert Kerr, the Surgeon General, obviously an important man in Niagara, both for the military and for the citizens of the town. I know that at some point, Molly Brant stood probably where I'm standing, and I imagine that when Brock was here, he also stood somewhere near this stone. I have one interesting story about the stone that shows it seems to be protected somehow. We had a very large storm one spring, and a large tree which stood just over there came down. I came to the cemetery in full knowledge that this stone was destroyed. When I got here, I discovered the trunk of the tree was exactly where I'm standing now, the stone unscathed. Beyond the stones and the stories with the stones, there are 2 aspects of the cemetery that are very special. One is that this is the original lie of the land. No one has changed it. If you had been here in 1790, it would have looked the same. The only thing that doesn't look the same, of course, are the trees. We have a wonderful, wonderful collection of trees in this cemetery. About 10 years ago, the trees were in bad condition, and we began a program of planting slowly memorial trees. And in that 10-year period, we planted almost 100 mature trees. You can see them all around you, and they are really one of the glories of the cemetery. Elizabeth Asher was a considerably important woman in the history of Niagara-on-the-Lake. She was born Elizabeth Masters, and the Masters were a very important Niagara family. Elizabeth married a man called Asher, and whom the family was uncertain about, and I guess with justification, because the marriage did not last. He went away to the American Army and was killed at the Battle of San Juan Hill. And Elizabeth then, left without support of a husband, took to writing. She wrote for the St. Catharines newspaper and the Buffalo newspaper, and she had for herself a reasonable and good life. At the time of the First World War, influenza was spreading through the army camp which was here. And there was a group of Polish soldiers here at Niagara, and Elizabeth decided that it was her duty to go and help with the care and the nursing of these Polish soldiers. So she nursed them all through this terrible epidemic, and even though her careful ministration saved many, 27 of these Polish boys died, as well as many hundreds of others. At the end of the war, Elizabeth became very interested in Poland and became a one-woman relief organization to Poland in this post-war period. And she gathered together drugs and clothing and food and had this tremendous operation working out of Little Niagara-on-the-Lake. The significance, I suspect, is that her contribution to Poland was second only in Canada to that of the city of Montreal. She was a really, really hardworking and important person. About that time, the government of Poland was so impressed with her work that they gave her an award, and the insignia is on the stone, and this is equal to a knighthood. Sergeant Tracy was stationed at Fort George, and he had with him his wife and family. During the time that he was here, his daughter Sarah Ann died and was brought to St. Mark's and buried. She was 6 years old, and it is interesting that such an impressive and important monument will be placed on the grave of so young a child. Sergeant Tracy and his family, after Sarah Ann's death, removed to Kingston, where he became a fairly prominent member of Kingston society. In recent times, Sarah Ann has returned to Fort George, and many visitors and members of the staff of Fort George have seen her ghost. So a lot of the people who go there to see her ghost come to St. Mark's to see her monument.